Good evening, everybody. If I could, if anybody who wishes, from the public who wishes to speak this evening, if you could just sign up on the sheet here so we have the correct spelling of your name, I'd appreciate it. We're going to open the public hearing now, first public hearing, by reading the notice into the record. Notice is hereby given that the Seymour Planning and Zoning Commission will conduct a public hearing on Thursday, October 10, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. in the Norma Drummer Room of Seymour Town Hall, 1 First Street, Seymour, Connecticut. Upon application of SHC Seymour Springs LLC for the approval of an application for text change of the zoning regulations of the Town of Seymour as follows. To amend Section 3.0 of the zoning regulations to add a new subsection, G, quote, the Affordable Housing Zone, or AHZ, as a floating zone that may be permitted within the MF and R18 zoning districts. And secondly, to amend the zoning regulations to add a new Section 18A to establish regulations governing the new affordable housing zone. The purpose of the proposed change to the zoning regulations is to establish regulations that will provide the Town of Seymour and the region with multi-family market rate and affordable residential rental units in compliance with Section 8-30G of the Connecticut General Statutes. Proposed regulation establishes standards to facilitate such development on selected parcels on which construction will be consistent with soil types, terrain, and infrastructure capacity. A full copy of the above referenced application is available for review in the Office of the Planning and Zoning Department, Seymour Town Hall, 1 First Street, Seymour, Connecticut. At the above time and place, all interested persons shall be given an opportunity to be heard. The hearing may be continued to such time and place as may be announced by the Seymour Planning and Zoning Commission. With that, we'll open the public hearing. And questions to the applicant. We have the second hearing that's noticed for 6:45. My intention is to just open that hearing at that point. I have some comments to make. It'll probably take me 15 minutes to just open that second hearing. At the same time, we do both at the same time as that. We can, well, we just opened the text change. We'll always open the other one at 6:45. It was noticed for 6:45. That's why. Then you can just do both at the same time. That's good with us? Okay. All right. First, I'll say a few words about procedure for this evening, and also I want to say a few words about the nature of tonight's application. Then we should be underway by about 6:45. The way we're going to the applicant will first present its project through its professionals, through its attorneys, principals perhaps, representative. We will ask questions as appropriate of the applicant, if that's okay at the time, unless you prefer we wait till the end. When the applicant has finished, the commission may ask questions. Following that, we will be looking to our staff for comments or questions. After we've gotten some discussion from staff, at that point, we'll open up the floor to public comment. And we'll do that in 3 phases. At first, we'll hear from people who may be in favor of the application. Then we'll hear from people who may be opposed to the application. Thirdly, then we'll hear from people who merely want to comment, not necessarily be categorized as opposed or in favor. And anybody who has any questions, I would ask that you direct the questions to me as chair. I'll then turn to the applicant for an answer. It may be after the public comment, in which case the applicant's likely to want to take notes and remember the questions because it'll be important to have answered them. Okay? So generally, I will ask that nobody speak unless you're recognized by the chair. We have to have an orderly meeting tonight. I'll also not put a specific time limit on anybody's comments. I won't say it's going to be 2 minutes or 3 or 5 minutes. You can get your thoughts out. What I will ask, however, is to make sure that you keep your comments relevant to the application, the hearing, and also try not to be repetitive. If you're about to say something that's already been said, it would make more sense for you simply to say, I agree with the previous speaker who said A, B, C, or D. That way we'll make sure to get through and hear everybody's comments. Most of all, I'm going to require that every person in the room be absolutely respectful to every other person in the room at all times. If we lose sight of that, if we get into any kind of an argument or people talking over each other, I'll be adjourning the meeting for some period of time. We'll take a time out, come back 10 minutes later and try again. If it happens again, we'll do the same thing. And if we have any difficulties beyond that, I'll simply continue the meeting to next month. So it's very important that we maintain an orderly presentation of the application and an orderly discussion of the public's comments as well. When you come up to speak, there's the microphone. Identify yourself. Speak into the microphone, identify yourself, and give your address for the record. My intention at this point is to adjourn this hearing. We have some other business to attend to after this. At about 8:30, we may go a little bit later. And once it's adjourned, the hearing will be continued for next month. So you will have an opportunity, if you need to come back again next month. After public comment, then we'll allow the applicant to respond. That will be the point at which it would be appropriate for the applicant to answer questions that have come up and anything else that the applicant deems appropriate. All right, the second thing I want to do until we open up the second hearing is just discuss a little bit about this application. And I'd like to give you this background because as an attorney, I've been on all sides of the issues that are likely to come up tonight. I've represented neighbors opposing developments. I've represented developers and land use applications before various boards. I've been on 2 planning and zoning commissions. I spent 5 years on the Monroe Zoning and Planning and Zoning Commission prior to moving to Seymour 10 years ago. And one of the things that always bothered me was the frustration level that these things sometimes generate. And a lot of times the frustration exists because you don't really understand necessarily exactly what's happening or understand the rules. So that's why I want to take just a couple of minutes to go through this. Most importantly, I think it's crucial that you understand the powers that we have as a commission. And maybe even more important than that is the powers we don't have as commissioners. I'll try to outline that a bit, and if in the course of doing so, our council, or applicant council feels that I've oversimplified and want to correct me, that's fine. We can talk about that too. Basically, we as the commission need to follow the law. And the law has given us certain discretion, but we only have the discretion that the laws, the statutes, and our regulations give us. We're not all powerful. We can't decide all issues for all people. It just simply doesn't work that way. If we, as a commission, do something that goes against the law, an aggrieved party can appeal our decision. That appeal will be to the Connecticut Superior Court. And that could be the developer, it could be townspeople, any party withstanding could bring an appeal to our decision. Either way, the people in this room, whether it's the citizens, the people, residents of Seymour, their tax dollars we pay for that, and that can be very expensive. Appeals getting to court are very expensive. If the town goes to court, it's going to hit us all on our pocketbooks, no question. And then, of course, if ultimately the court were to overturn our decision, a lot of the frustration, the time, and the expense would have been for nothing. And that is something that I, as a taxpayer, and I, as a volunteer member of the municipal board, really think it's important to avoid. And so that's why I'm going to take a couple minutes to talk specifically about affordable housing projects. This Connecticut Affordable Housing Statute presents a very different set of circumstances for a board like this, for our board, specifically, our planning and zoning commissions. Keep in mind that technically tonight we're hearing we're hearing two things. We're hearing about a zone change that the applicant is proposing, that would be townwide. We're also hearing about a zone change that would be specific to the parcels that the applicant owns, and then a change to our regulations that would be townwide. So those are the two things we'll be talking about tonight. Tonight, there won't be any approval for a specific project. That would happen when a site plan application comes in, and there will be another hearing for that. So one thing that will not happen is we are not going to approve anything to get built this evening. That's just not what we're here for. So it's important just to keep that in mind. And the applicant might have chosen that route for any number of reasons. But regardless, by proceeding this way, we can talk to the applicant about regulations that would be townwide and discuss them and negotiate with them. Whereas had the applicant simply come in with an application for a site plan and to actually build a project, the law actually allows the developer to pretty much dictate what the terms of those regulations are going to be. So we have a little bit of a delicate balancing to do here. And whether we want to move towards townwide regulations that we can control a little bit, maybe have a good set of regulations for the entire town, versus dealing with a single one-site application over which we would have very little control in how it was put together. So, normally, when an application comes before us, the developer has to prove that he or she or it has complied with our zoning regulations as they are written. And in the affordable housing context, it's completely different. The law basically says that in order for a commission to deny an application, the commission has to show three things. The first is that the denial is necessary to protect an important public interest. Not private interest necessarily, but important, necessary to protect an important public interest. That's the first thing we would have to show with a denial. Secondly, we would have to show that the interest that the town has in protecting, or the need for protecting that public interest that the town has, outweighs the need that the town has for affordable housing. And generally that's determined by how much of a town's housing stock qualifies under the affordable housing statute as affordable housing. And the applicant is likely to get into what the definition of affordable housing is. The law also can provide an exemption for towns that have more than 10% of their housing stock, housing that qualifies as affordable. Now, currently, we're under 6%. I think we're about 5.75% affordable housing. So we're below that threshold. And then finally, we have to determine as a commission that this public interest we're trying to protect simply cannot be accomplished without reasonable changes to the project. So those are the rules that the commission is bound by. Those are the rules that we have to follow. The rules we can't change. Without being, I don't want to appear being flip about this, but if this is a statute you don't like, or if there's any statute or law you don't like, you have to talk to your legislators, state representatives, state senators. Those are the bodies, legislative bodies that create the laws. So we have to deal with these statutes in the form in which we find them. Okay? So at this point, I think what we'll do is we'll open up the second hearing since it's 6:45. To do that, I'm going to read into the record second notice. Notice is hereby given that the Seymour Planning and Zoning Commission will conduct a public hearing on Thursday, October 10 at 6:45 p.m. in the Norman Drummer Room of Seymour Town Hall, 1 First Street, Seymour, Connecticut, on application of SHC Seymour Springs LLC for approval of an application for a zoning map change as follows. The change to a new zoning district known as the Affordable Housing District, subject to a companion application for a text change the zoning regulations of the town of Seymour creating the AHC, certain properties consisting of approximately 10.6 acres, commonly known as 20 Spring Street, that being parcel ID 8-12-51-0, 16 Smith Street, parcel ID 8-12-50-0, and 17 Smith Street, parcel ID 8-12-32-0, and is more particularly shown and delineated on the map set forth below. The purpose of the proposed change to the zoning map is to allow the above referenced properties to be developed as a residential community known as Bladen's Ridge that will provide the town of Seymour and the region with multifamily, affordable, and market-rate residential rental units in compliance with Section 8-30G of the Connecticut General Statute. A full copy of the above referenced application is available for review in the Office of Planning and Zoning Department, Seymour Town Hall, 1 First Street, Seymour, Connecticut. At the above time and place, all interested persons shall be given an opportunity to be heard. The hearing may be continued to such time and place as may be announced by the Seymour Planning and Zoning Commission. With that, we'll turn this over to the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Lisa Feinberg. I'm going to propose this meeting tonight with my colleagues, Maureen Cox and Jason Klein, our speakers behind me, and also in this general vicinity, Timothy Gooding from Gooding Architecture, John Paul. No. Yeah, sorry. No problem.
Take two. For the record, my name is Lisa Feinberg. I am an attorney with Carmody, Torrance, Sandak, and Hennessy. I have two of my colleagues with me here tonight, Maureen Cox and Jason Klein. I also have a team of folks that are part of the development project. Timothy Gooding from Gooding Architecture, John Paul Garcia from John Paul Garcia and Associates, Stephen Ullman from Alfred Benich and Company, and then on behalf of the owner, SHC Seymour Springs LLC, Jerry Kiley and Greg Shaughnessy. So all of these folks are here just in case you all have questions that I am not the most appropriate person to answer. You can find resumes for Mr. Gooding, Mr. Garcia, Mr. Walters, and Mr. Ullman at tab 3 of the compendium that my colleague Jason Klein is going to hand out shortly. As you know, Mr. Kiley filed several applications with the town of Seymour recently to build, in connection with a proposal to build a 90-unit apartment complex in accordance with Section 830G of the Connecticut General Statutes, known as the Affordable Housing Statute. It's my understanding that tonight's hearings are focused on the text change, creating the Affordable Housing Zone, the AHZ zone, and then the zoning map change, which would if approved, redesignate my client's property into the AHC zone. So my comments are going to be focused that way. The AHC zone has been proposed in furtherance of local policies encouraging a variety of affordable housing options and more sustainable development. Like any new zoning district, the AHC zone includes a purpose, eligibility criteria, permitted uses, development standards, and an application process. However, the most significant aspect of the AHC zone is the inclusion of a mandatory affordability component, which is in conformance with Section 830G of the Connecticut General Statutes, the Affordable Housing Statute. So in accordance with that statute, the AHC zone requires that a minimum of 30% of the units within a development, a deed-restricted development, be deed-restricted as affordable to families earning no more than 80% of either the area median income or the state median income, whichever is lesser. And here, the state median income is actually a bit lower than Seymour's median income. So the state would apply. 15% of those units would need to be affordable at the 80% of SMI level, and then the other 15% would need to be considered affordable at the 60% of SMI level. And this deed restriction needs to remain in place for a minimum of 40 years. Other key components related to the affordability requirement come from the affordable housing statute that are within the AHZ zone include construction quality. So affordable units need to be constructed of a quality that is comparable in terms of size, distribution, and materials to the market rate units. Marketing requirements, the owner has to market the affordable housing units in the same way that he markets the market rate units. If the development, in our case, the development is proposed as a rental development, but it could, in a different case, be proposed as a ownership development. In the rental case, the leases need to include a specific provision, basically alerting tenants to the affordability requirement within the affordable units only. And then the same thing would take place with the deeds in a home ownership situation. You have to create an affordability plan for a site plan application. So that would include all of the rules and regulations for how the affordability is maintained and how the owner maintains his compliance.
If I could interrupt just a moment.
Sure.
The fire marshal wanted us to point out that if we got over 50 people, we might be there, where the exits are. There's an exit here, and then there are 2 exits there. There are no hidden exits. And there's another exit back there, so make note of it. I think we're very close to 50. My apologies.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then, of course, there are enforcement powers, and the P&Z would maintain the same enforcement powers that they would traditionally have in accordance with Section 812 of the Connecticut General Statutes. So in terms of development standards, you should find them relatively familiar because we use your multifamily, your MF zone standards, which are applicable to garden apartments as the baseline for our regulation change. And that made sense because my client's property is currently primarily MF zoned. If you turn to tab 2 in your compendium that Jay handed out, you'll see exactly how these apartments compare he's handing out now, excuse me, the AHZ standards compared to the MF zone standards. And I'll just wait a minute for everybody to get a copy. That's at tab 2. So you'll see that the minimum lot size in the AHZ zone has been doubled in comparison to the MF. So in the MF zone, you have to have a minimum of 2 acres. In the AHZ zone, you would have to have a minimum of 4 acres. The density was reduced from 7,000 square feet per unit to 4,750 square feet per unit, which is in keeping with that minimum lot size increase. So you can put more units on a larger parcel. As a reference point, the AHZ is effectively 3 units per acre more than the MF zone. The affordability component is obviously a new addition. The MF zone does not include that affordability component per se with garden apartments, and the AHZ zone incorporates the 30% requirement that the statute requires. Open space was actually increased. So in the MF zone, you have to have at least 30% of your parcel as open space. In the AHZ zone, it's 50%. Lot coverage is a little bit challenging to compare because the AHZ zone is based on building coverage, not lot coverage. And there seems to be just a mathematical anomaly in the MF zone. But nonetheless, the AHZ effectively has a 50% lot coverage maximum because we have a 50% open space minimum. The MF provides for 33% maximum. The lot square remains the same. Parking is reduced from 2 spaces per unit to 1.75 spaces per unit. Max height, the AHZ, it's at 45 feet. The MF is 3 stories. That's comparable. Minimum front yards and side yards are the same. Minimum rear yard was reduced from 75 feet to 35 feet in the AHZ. Minimum distance between buildings and setbacks from internal roadways were both reduced from 50 feet to 20 feet. And then one standard that is not in the chart but is within the AHC regulation is that an affordable housing development must be on a parcel that has access to municipal sewer and water. I understand these uses may meet that requirement from the MS zone.
May I ask a quick question? How many stories can you fit into 45 feet?
3 stories.
Thank you.
On your open space, you have this listed as 50%, but in your text proposal, you have it listed as 50% of non-pervious area.
I have it listed as 50% of non-pervious area.
That's what's in this proposed text.
Let's stop
Which
this for a
would be
moment.
able
Let's pause for a moment to figure out what's wrong with it.
There's a power issue with that. It's like a mental
We'll just hold for a few minutes.
test. Test 1. Again.
I believe that the language that you're looking at says that the open space will include all pervious area. Is that? If there's some sort of.
I think it's a battery issue. I'm sorry.
Well, let's pause again and see what we can do about this.
Lisa, if you'd like to continue with this one.
Sure.
Test 1.
Do you mind sharing with me? Does that answer your question? I believe the language you're looking at just says that the open space includes all pervious, and the purpose behind that was just to say that it's not necessarily grass, that it could be, pervious pavers or something of the
Or
sort.
buildings, correct?
Well, buildings aren't pervious.
That's what I mean.
Open space would only include pervious.
I'm looking at calculation. We can get into this later. 50% of the area used for the purpose of calculating permitted density shall be reserved as open space. So you're
That's
taking
the lot area, 50% of the lot area. The lot is used for calculating the density, and there's no sort of exceptions within the AHC zone in terms of the lot area.
Has your question been answered?
Yeah, open space.
Let's
Maybe,
let's continue. We can follow up questions after your
Okay.
presentation.
Sure. I think I was going to move on to the property.
Test 1. Test.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the other piece of tonight's public hearing is the zone change application, the redesignation of my client's property into the AHZ zone, which I just described to you all. So my client owns 3 separate parcels, which you see here on the map outlined in yellow. The big piece is known as 20 Spring Street. This piece here is known as 16 Spring Street, and then it's Smith Street, 16 Smith Street. That's an incorrect note. And then across the street is 17 Smith Street. Collectively, the rezoning would be for a total of 10.6 acres. The majority of the property is currently located in the MF zone, your multifamily zone. That's just over 9 acres, the 20 Spring Street portion. And then just over an acre and a half is located in the R18 zone. So if the zone change application is approved, all of this land would be redesignated as AHC and subject to the standards that I articulated previously. In connection with your review, I think it's really important to remember the key purpose of the Affordable Housing Statute, which is to encourage and facilitate the much-needed development of affordable housing throughout the state. As a remedial statute, it is liberally construed, as Mr. Chairman, you noted earlier, in favor of those seeking the affordable housing. Under tab 1 in your compendium, you'll find the statutory standard that, Mr. Chairman, you outlined previously at the opening of the hearing, if you need to reference it at any point. But in sum, in order to deny an affordable housing application, the Commission must find that a substantial public interest that you seek to protect clearly outweighs the need for affordable housing, and such public interest cannot be protected by reasonable changes to our proposal. So in other words, unlike a conventional zoning application, the burden is on the Commission, not the applicant, in the context of an affordable housing proposal. And as Attorney Sullivan previously noted, an affordable housing application can be approved without a text change or a zone change. It does not have to comply with your underlying zoning regulations because Section 830G does supersede zoning regulations. However, my client chose to create an affordable housing regulation, an affordable housing zone, and redesignate their property as such to remove any ambiguity regarding the rules related to the proposed development. The other method would...
Pardon me. I have just a quick question on the 830G statute. The burden of proof on approval, is that for the overall application or for the zoning change itself?
It is for any affordable housing related application. So that burden applies to the zone change, it applies to the regulation change, and it applies to the site plan.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, sir. The other method, procedure, if you will, would have been to simply file a site plan application without anything else. And the courts have said that's essentially a de facto zone change. So in other words, the applicable standards at that point would be whatever was actually constructed. In our opinion, filing the text change and the zone change applications was just a better process and a more transparent process for everyone. And there are other added benefits created by the process. The AHC zone is a floating zone that only can land on property, as we have drafted it anyway, currently zoned MF, with lots permitted to include a maximum of 2 acres of R18. And the reason we included that R18 is, most importantly, my client's property access is R18. And if you look at the zoning map, most of the MF zoned properties are surrounded by R18, and many of them require R18 zoned property for access. So we didn't want it to be able to land wholly within the R18, but we did need to recognize that there would likely be an R18 component. So by limiting the AHC to the MF properties, you're encouraging denser development in areas you've already designated for denser development. This type of proactive approach has been favorably received by the courts, so that when developers have sought to develop affordable housing, multifamily, dense affordable housing in areas that don't have the infrastructure in place to support it, that's weighed against the Commission's proactive effort to encourage it in the places that can provide the infrastructure to support it. So creating a zone that facilitates the development of affordable housing is critical to our state and to your community. Currently, as Mr. Chairman, you noted, Seymour only has 5.75% of its housing stock considered as affordable within the meaning of the statute. Based on the 2016 Plan of Conservation and Development, I believe there's a 2 to 3 year waiting list for housing with the Seymour Housing Authority. The majority of Seymour's multifamily housing stock is between 30 to 40 years old. I believe your POCD says the median age is 1965. So while it may be de facto affordable in some instances, it's not deed restricted affordable. Thus, if an owner decides to invest in his or her property and make improvements, there's absolutely nothing that stops them from raising rents. So according to the Connecticut Economic Resource Center's 2018 profile for Seymour, 71.5% of your total dwellings are owner-occupied. 46.7% of the renters are cost burdened, which means that they're spending more than 30% of their income on rent. According to your POCD, the population in Seymour is growing, but it's also aging. The POCD projects a population increase of 7.5% by 2025. However, the number of residents in their prime working age, 35 to 54, is expected to decrease, while older adults aged 55 and over is expected to increase. Projections suggest that by 2025, there will be about 7% fewer non-school age children and about 12% fewer school-age children than from 2010. The increase in older residents, combined with the estimated downward turn of the population of children, means Seymour is expected to be a town of increasingly older individuals. This impacts housing for two reasons. Seniors no longer interested in mortgage payments or maintaining larger homes, but who want to stay in their communities, they need a place to live. They need another housing alternative. If Seymour wants to attract younger people to backfill the aging population, the town needs to provide quality rental options. And your POCD smartly identifies that. There are numerous goals within the POCD related to an effort to really bring in young people and to provide an opportunity to maintain your seniors. Things like maintain housing diversity to meet the needs of the community, continue to work with the Seymour Housing Authority to meet the needs of the elderly population, the need for more sustainable, affordable housing options, and many more. I guess my point is that the data demonstrates that this community, like many communities in Connecticut, is in need of affordable housing. And it would take the community that much closer towards the goal of 10% by allowing affordable housing in places that you've already designated for multifamily housing. And if you look at, what tab is that, Jay, with the hue points? Tab 5. I'm assuming that everyone is not as deeply familiar with the 830G statute as I have become. But we spoke briefly about the requirement for 10% of your housing stock to be affordable within the meaning of the statute. In many towns, Seymour included, it can be very challenging to meet that 10% threshold because there's just not the development to create the number of units that you would need to make that 10%. So the legislature has recognized that, and there are opportunities to get moratoriums. And the way that you get a moratorium, and they're typically 4 years at a time, is that you demonstrate that you are making the effort, that you are building, that you are trying to get closer, and points are allocated based on that effort. And so at tab 5, those hue points show you how much closer you would get towards the ability for a moratorium with a development like my client is proposing. That is about all that I have in terms of the...
Expand a little bit on that. I'm looking at...
Sure. I'm actually going to ask my colleague, Jay Klein, to come up because he's become intimately involved with the hue points, and he'll explain why you guys threw it.
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Jay Klein of Carmody Law. As Lisa mentioned, one piece of the 830G puzzle is this ability for towns to achieve moratoriums from subsequent 830G applications for a period of time. The way that you achieve a moratorium is by building affordable housing units. And what the statute does, it provides different points for different types of units. Using our project as an example, we have 62 market rate units. When market rate units are part of an affordable housing development, those market rate units are worth 1/4 HUE point or HUE point. Affordable units that are 80% or less of the state median income that are rental units are worth 1.5 points each. And then similarly, affordable units, rental units at 60% are worth 2 points each. And then finally, if you have any 3-bedroom units, each 3-bedroom unit is worth a bonus 1/4 point. So through this project, through our proposal alone, we would earn Seymour, we estimate 68.25 points, 68.25 points. In order to achieve a moratorium, Seymour needs 139.36 points. So this development is going a long way towards achieving the town's first moratorium, which isn't easy. There are very few towns that have achieved a moratorium to date. And then another interesting piece about this, we tried to, as Lisa said, we surveyed the town, what housing options, what housing choices are available in the community. And there are a couple senior housing developments that the Housing Authority runs. There's one that's right next door to us. I think there are 56, at least we were told by the state, 56 units in there. Those right now are only worth 28 HUE points. If you build enough multifamily non-senior housing, you can double the value of the points from this project. This project could go from 28 to 56 HUE points. So this proposal is really going a long way towards achieving that moratorium.
Yeah, I'd like to know where you got your 5.75% numbers from, how and who determined those.
That's a great question. The state publishes this information, I think, on an annual basis. They base it off the U.S. Census. So we got that 5.75 number from the state of Connecticut and from the U.S. Census.
It's not a calculation that you guys did.
No, we're not at that level. Yeah.
Can you explain the difference between the median income that HUD uses for this, the 100,000 some odd dollars that the state has, and the median income for the state of Connecticut, which I believe is in the $75,000 range?
Median. I'm
paperwork
looking at
that-
Lisa because I'm just not sure if
The paperwork submitted indicated that there's two numbers that are used, either the town or the state median income, and we're using the state, which is just a shade above $100,000. State median income by pretty much any other metric is well below that. Can you explain how HUD gets those numbers?
I'd have to pull the calculation from HUD's website. There is a calculation, and they spit out the numbers. So we didn't create it; they do. There's one, if I may, unless that someone has another question. There was one other thing that I proactively just wanted to touch on. I think a question that you all may have is, where else could the AHC zone land, right? So I talked about the fact that it could only land in multifamily zone property with the exception of some small pieces of R18. We did an extensive study of your MF zone property, and you'll find that. What tab is that at, Jay? At tab 4. We went through, and this is all based on your tax assessor's information, so it's only as accurate as that information is. But it does give you kind of a little bit of color in terms of where this could land. And we found that the majority of your multifamily zone property is already developed, right? So the idea that this is going to happen on all of those properties, at least in the short term, is probably a little bit far-fetched. There are a few properties that are vacant. There, of course, is my client's property. There is a property, hear me. I believe everything is highlighted in yellow that we've kind of flagged as likely opportunities for an AHC zone. So the other one is 6.5 acres at 30 Progress Avenue, which is currently a factory building. That is also zoned MF and may provide an opportunity for an affordable housing development in the future. There is some property owned by the town of Seymour throughout town that theoretically could become AHZ zone, and then more likely than that, 43 George Street, which is just over 4 acres, would be eligible, and 50 Prospect Street, which is almost 15 and a half acres, would be eligible. And those were really the main pieces that we were able to determine would be eligible based on the standards that we have crafted. Mr. Chairman, that's really all I had in terms of presentation. Unless there's something that you all want to, something else you'd like to hear about.
Is it appropriate at this point in the meeting to ask specific logistical questions about the lot itself? Or was that something that should wait for another time?
Well, that's the question, let's find out.
Okay. Beg forgiveness, I like it. So you have 11 units proposed on this, correct?
11 buildings.
11 buildings, right. So are there specific units that you're planning on designating as affordable housing, or will there be individual apartments, if you will, just colloquial language, within those units? In other words, is there going to be, let's take unit 11, for example. Is that going to be the 80% zone or the 60% zone?
No, it will not. In fact, we have to distribute the affordable housing units throughout the entire complex. If you look within your big binder that we submitted, there's an affordability plan, and
I think it's tab 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Jim.
I've done a lot of
Big
homework.
binder? We have a binder right here, Commissioners.
Yep, there it is.
You got 2 of those, Jim.
Okay, I see it. Yep, building 1, building 2, the
right,
highlighted
so there's
yellow areas.
we've highlighted the units that we anticipate would be the affordable units at this point in time. Obviously, that could change in connection with the final development, but we do have a requirement to evenly distribute them throughout the buildings and within throughout the 2 and 3 bedrooms.
Okay. What are you planning on doing? And I'm not great at reading schematics, but there's a little notch down there between 2 houses. On the initial lot, it's listed between the Dom and Perez houses. This notch here, what are you planning on doing with that? Is that going to be road access?
We are getting a little bit into the site plan, but I'm happy to answer the question. This is proposed as an access. My client would like to restrict it to emergency vehicles only, and under the AHZ zone, that is a possibility. Of course, that would be at your discretion. And in fact, we included an addendum letter to our traffic study, because our original traffic study studied the site as if it were dual access all the time. So we did include an addendum in your compendium that we handed out tonight that demonstrates that the single access will work just fine.
So you might not have to do anything with that, because that seems like it's a yard.
It's a vacant. It's the only access to 20 Spring Street, so it's actually part of 20 Spring Street, but it looks like a yard from the naked eye for sure. It's grass.
Right.
What is the status of your site plan application at this point?
The site plan application was filed at the same time as the text change and the zone change. It's all within your binder.
Are we noticing it here? Are we going to be setting a date for hearing on that?
I would love to move forward with the site plan application as quickly as the commission is willing to. We've been asking that from the beginning. I wasn't sure whether a public hearing was going to be proposed or not. I know under your regulations, public hearings are not typically part of the process with a site plan. So we've been waiting for direction from your staff and from the commission.
Can you take us into the stormwater management system that you've put forward on?
Probably getting a little far afield.
Getting a little too far? Okay, then I'll retract that question.
I make that decision, and as I said, nobody speaks unless you raise your hand, you make the determination, and we'll have public comment shortly, okay? Now, is there anything else that the applicant wishes to?
Happy to answer any additional questions that the
Are there any other
commissioners have.
questions from the commissioners?
So at this time, we're not dealing with anything that's in or not included in the site plan application?
We're dealing with, you can answer the question, but we're dealing with two issues. We're dealing with zone change, and we're dealing with the proposed new regulation. That's the only thing we're dealing with during this hearing.
Everything else I have is specific to the site plan, so no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
We'll deal with the site plan.
Yeah. Who is he assigned enforcement to? This commission?
Enforcement of the affordability component,
Yeah.
the commission would have the same enforcement powers as they do with any zoning application. So yes, under
How would we
812.
know?
So it would fall under E CEO?
Yes, you typically would send it
That
to
would be-
CEO.
What would happen is annual reports would be generated as to the income of each of the individuals.
Correct.
Then, if they fell outside of the criteria,
We'd be in violation. We would be in violation, correct.
All right, if the applicant is done at this point, I'd like to, and do we have any other questions from any of the commissioners? I'd like to get some input from staff. Keith, do you want to give us a little bit of your thoughts as you feel appropriate? Sure.
Commission, public, members of the public, I just want to say I'm happy to be here and happy to serve the town of Seymour in this project and this proposal and in helping make a decision. Oh, yeah. My name is Keith Rosenfeld. I am the town planner for the town of Seymour. Now I work for the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments as a regional municipal planner. I've been a planner in the state of Connecticut for over 31 years, and as I said, I'm happy to be here and happy to assist you in making any decision here tonight. Although the applicant has said that the multifamily has some relationship to the affordable housing zone, I feel that in their studies you can see that they have looked at the multifamily housing that currently exists on the site and have compared some of those elements to the affordable housing zone and shown that most of them have lined up to be equivalent. There are some differences, and I'd like you to look at those differences, and maybe the applicant to look at those differences during the times when this public hearing is going on, as well as during the time when the decision-making is going to be taking place with the commission.
Now, if I could interrupt, you haven't had the benefit of looking at these figures. You looked at the figures from the initial application, is that correct?
Yes.
And they're different.
Yes. I did a study of the multifamily versus the affordable housing requirements, and I saw that there were 5 differences that I'd like for the applicant to look at over this period of public hearing and perhaps come back with a modification. One has to do with stories. The garden apartments are the Section 10.1 multifamily housing zoning requirements show that the garden apartments have a level of no more than 3 habitable stories that are allowed to be in the multifamily garden apartments, and the Bladen's Ridge affordable housing lists that requirement as no more than 45 feet. So I think that that's something that the commission needs to look at.
So the applicant said that 45 feet is 3 stories. Do you
I would say it's more like 3.5. It could be a little taller.
What's the significance of a half a story?
Fire truck?
Well, not necessarily. It's something that we will hear during the site plan stage, but it's something that needs to be looked at this point. The required rear yard for a garden apartment is 75 feet, and the affordable housing proposal is 35 feet. So it lessens the distances in the rear yards between the property and adjacent property. Paved travel lane is shown as 10 feet in the section 10.1.3 garden apartments, and it's not referenced. There is no reference for the width of the travel lane in a driveway in the proposed text. There also is a maximum grade of private roadway in the garden apartments. It's 12 to 14%, and that 14% is only allowed during stretches of 100 feet or less. It's not referenced in the affordable housing text, and we'd like you to look at making that equitable. And then the last thing I have, and maybe Brian will get into that, is that on the garden apartments, it is required that there is all on-site detention of all stormwater. And as you can see with the affordable housing, that it allows for non-contiguous property to be. And we'd like to have both the applicant and the commission consider the differences of containing all the stormwater on the property versus allowing for the stormwater to be handled on another property. This may not be so difficult through engineering on this property, but we're looking at a overall town-wide change, and it may present problems on other properties. So since we're looking at something that could affect the entire town, we'd like for the applicant to look at that as well. These are just preliminary reviews of this property. We will definitely have more comments when we hear from the public, as well as when we hear some more from the commissioners themselves. So at this time, I'll reserve the right to comment again at the next meeting when we have a more substantial application in front of us.
Mr. Syriac, did you want to make some comments?
For the record, Brian Asteriak, I'm the town engineering consultant. Most of the things that Keith had brought up, I had also taken a look at. I think in general, what you have to start considering is whether or not you want an affordable regulation in the code, because they don't have to, as they've mentioned, they don't have to actually have this. So if you want an affordable regulation, then look at all of the items that they're proposing. Things such as the density, like Mr. Rosenberg said, the height, stories. In particular, the height with relation to property lines. So they have very high buildings very close to the property lines. Look at those, consider it. What would you like to see if an affordable development is something that you want to progress in this town? In general, some of the regulations are very vague, although I know they're based on our regulations. But some of the landscaping, the roadway designs, some of those things I think are left a little too vague for a density or a very dense development like they're proposing. Just some general comments. Happy to answer any questions if you'd like.
I have a question for council. Ms. Sullivan. The applicant indicated that the burden shifting occurs on any application under the affordable housing. My understanding is that a zone change or a text amendment would not be subject to that reversal.
I think you're right about that. I mean, I was surprised to hear that from council. I'll certainly check it out, but my sense is that on a zone change or a zoning regulation, they don't need to have those, but that the burden does not shift. That you are not in a 8-30G standard where that flips for those. But I can certainly provide you that information, and if council has some some research or some cases where that she thinks are applicable. You know, if she can share them with me, then you know, we'll take those into consideration.
I was shocked to see two lawyers disagreeing on something.
And I would make just one point as I was listening to the Commissioner's question. There was an indication of impervious surface. And my sense was that what Attorney Feinberg was saying was that she would consider pervious pavers as open space, so that it sounds like the regulation would allow for what we would consider a covered area, or say an access way, to be considered open space because it's pervious. So I think that's something that Brian was talking about in terms of the vagueness of the regulation, so that you could get a lot more coverage in the traditional sense by having pervious surface that was actually impervious or was intended to be travelway. And I think that's what you were getting at with your question. So.
Do any commissioners have any questions of staff? Or, I'm sorry, Mr. Baldwin, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a, for you to read into the record, we have a staff referral report from the Naugatuck Valley COG. I'd like to place this into the record.
I'll read this letter, it's short. I'll read this into the record. Staff referral report to Planning and Zoning Commission from Joanna Rogowski, Regional Planner, NBCOG. Description proposed to the Town of Seymour Planning and Zoning Commission has received the following proposed changes to its zoning regulations. The applicant, SHC Seymour Springs LLC, through its attorney, Carmody Torrance Sandak Hennessy LLP, has submitted an application to Seymour Planning and Zoning Commission for a zoning map change, zoning regulation change, and site plan approvals in connection with Bladen affordable housing development for property located at 20 Spring Street, 16 Smith Street, and 17 Smith Street. Seymour zoning regulation change includes the proposal to create a new affordable housing zone, AHZ, with a new section, section 18A, to the Seymour zoning regulation. The purpose of this amendment is to facilitate development of rental housing with market rate and affordable units, which is consistent with soil types, terrain, infrastructure capacity, and adjacent residential uses. Staff recommendation. Staff finds the proposed text amendment to be regionally significant and have a potential positive intermunicipal impact. The proposed text amendments are in conformity with regional and state plans of conservation and development recommendations to relate land use intensity to the capability of the land and planning policy to expand housing opportunities. Seymour's affordable housing comprises 5.75% of its housing stock. As for the 2018 Affordable Housing Appeals List, this proposed text amendment may diversify and increase housing options in Seymour and may increase the supply of affordable housing in the NBCOG region. For the record, we also, do you have that, the letter from, we have a, well, we'll do that in public comment. Okay, so that's in the record.
I have two. Look, was on the text, it requires in there sewer and water. I would think we would add in at the applicant's expense some kind of study to prove that the existing infrastructure there could actually handle the addition of 99 units, whether that be with Aquarian or, you know, the WPCA. We have letters of recommendation here from Inland and Wetlands and other things, but we don't go to the WPCA, we don't go to Aquarian to see if we can provide that kind of water.
They would have to go to the WPCA to get this approved.
Okay, I do, to add that into the text.
Well, they would just have to do that anyway. It's not necessarily something that you'd have to spell out in the regulations because it's just required by the town. And then the water, that's really on them to determine whether there's enough water to get there.
Until there's a fire.
Well, that's part of the review from the fire marshal, but there's some engineering things that they'll have to go through to figure out whether or not they need fire pumps, if there's enough pressure, all that. But I think, maybe Keith knows better than me, that would be a little bit outside of the scope of the zoning requirements.
Is the,
And he agrees.
yeah, and we would probably reserve hearing from the fire marshal until we're looking at a site plan.
Yeah, that would be a site plan thing, sure.
Commissioners have any other questions of staff?
Not at this time.
All right, in that case, no? In that case, somebody say something? What I'd like to do is I'd like to hear from the public first. I want to enter into the record correspondence. It's lengthy, so I won't read it, but it'll be available to read. From Jesus and Martina Perez at 22 Spring Street, Seymour. Letter addressed to the commission. Part of the record. And with that, I'd like to open up the hearing now to any members of the public who'd like to speak in favor of this application. Step forward, step up to the mic. We have a few minutes. Hey, pardon?
For the record, Matthew Niski. I live in Seymour on 13 Charles Road. I'm also a professional engineer. I have actually done quite a bit of work with affordable housing projects down in Milford. I do understand the predicament you guys are in. It's very hard to stop these projects. So what I've learned with Milford is that it's not, you shouldn't try to fight it, you should try to negotiate with them. In this case here, for 1.75 seems a little low. You know, I'm by myself in my house, and 2 car parking spaces isn't enough for me and my girlfriend. So, sometimes, you know, think about those types of regulations. In terms of affordable housing, the only reason I'm here is because I bought my house on a short sale. Otherwise, I'd still be living at home in my parents' house. I've been a professional engineer now for 2 years, working in the professional field since I graduated 7 years ago. The market's not in favor of my generation, no matter what profession you're in. It is a good project in general. The one thing I would look at is there a low limit to come in? Most folks, when they hear affordable, think Section 8. To my knowledge, this is not a Section 8 housing. It never will be. It is designed to bring in my generation, teachers, firefighters, policemen, people starting out. And according to the regulations, it did, speaking of the attorney, it did seem like Seymour median age for affordable is higher. I'm only 29, and I've been in my house for 3 years. It was hard to get out. For these amount of units, I think it is 30 units for affordable. It would be nice to have places to move out of parents' houses and have things. In dealing with large apartment complexes like this, I've done one down in North Haven. Something to look at is landscaping buffers, so that way the neighbors are a little more forgiving with these projects. You know, dense vegetation, tall trees. They look nice, they protect the privacy. It's something to look into, and then that way everyone's kind of happy. The neighbors have some nice trees where there could have been a field. They don't see the buildings. But that's just my expertise and knowledge business. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak in favor of the application? Okay. In that case, I'm sorry.
Richard Young, 272 Pearl Street. My garage is on Spring Street. We have one sewer drain that access to Pearl Street. What are we going to do about if those buildings go in? We only have one access, and it's in front of my garage. Is the water going to take all that?
If I could interrupt you for a second, are you in favor of the application?
Oh, no.
But we'll have you up in a second. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of this application? Seeing nobody, now I'll open the floor to those people who wish to speak in opposition to the application. Step up, give your name and address.
Hi, my name is Sarah Calkins. I am at Sarah Calkins, Calkins. I'm at 19 Spring Street, and I have a petition with 350 signatures against this. Should I distribute them to you?
be entering into the record petition with signatures and addresses. Following individuals have signed to oppose the zone change in building the Bladen Bridge. Find the online petition tab. Gives a web address. This will be made a part of the record.
Thank you. Dear board members, I just want to ask, where is the urgency? Connecticut law, for the state law, is not breathing down on our neck. What we have here is just kind of a case of predatory developers taking advantage of our community. We can get up to that affordable income housing 10% required by the state of Connecticut, but we can do it the right way for our community. Seymour, as was spoken by the lawyers, we should seek out the moratorium and see what we can do to increase those numbers so we can get that 4-year grace period as we move forward to get that affordable income housing, as other close towns have done, such as Trumbull and Connecticut communities as well. And they have sought innovative ways to comply with the state law and are succeeding. So why is this the wrong location for a 90-unit apartment building? For one, the closeness of the shooting range, which already echoes through the valley, will be multiplied by the removal of the trees and large concrete buildings added. The tight bridge at the bottom of Pearl and North Street that is already congested with vehicles as well as trucks from the truck school. We have been forced to stop ourselves, our car, on many occasions for fear of being hit by vehicles as they come down the North Street. And trying to walk along that corner, along that bridge, is a nightmare, let alone with children. Which brings us to the complete lack of sidewalks is a huge issue. And this housing unit will bring both car and foot traffic, and we are unprepared in that section for both. And the sewer issue will be brought up. I know it's been brought up in the past. And then research has shown that property values end up declining as a result of proximity to affordable housing. This decline increases when the quality, the design, and the management of the affordable housing is poor, which is very good on the point that we need to have more details on what the design will be. And when affordable housing residents are clustered, such as we have in the case with the Seymour Housing Authority units, just a 4-minute walk away on Smith and a 10-minute walk up Walnut Street, where you have Chamberlain Road and Brothers Court. So again, I'm just asking, where's the urgency? We ask you to vote no to this zone change so that we may find the suitable plots that are right for all residents that are coming in and here now. I also urge that we should look into how other communities are handling this and maybe create our own affordable housing fund that developers might have to pay into with new builds so that Seymour Housing Authority can regulate where this housing could go, and that would best benefit the community instead of just leaving us prey to the whims of just greedy developers. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak?
My name is Chris Sizer. I live at 31 Spring Street. The the comments that Ms. Calkin just said are pretty accurate to those of us here against this move. The question that I have, I'm the one that lives right on that corner that comes up Smith, and I can tell you, just living there now, it's fairly congested and it's an incredibly difficult hairpin turn that people have to make. As you all know, there's a do not enter continuing going up Smith. So this 99-unit situation that's being added to this is a travesty. These attorneys sit here and tell us that they're trying to help the impoverished and the multifamily and all the things that Connecticut wants to do. Yeah, we're in favor of that too. Not that spot. That spot cannot handle this congestion that will more than quadruple. It will just be unbelievably difficult for the people in the street and in the neighborhood to tolerate this. The young lady just mentioned the reduction of our homes by the fact that the tax overall assessment will drop when you get this kind of thing. Okay, that's the way it goes. We get that. We got to be able to have, multifamily abodes for people. We can't just say, oh, we don't want them. But what we can do is say, you got to pick a better place that makes more sense for the town. The attorneys mentioned something about Prospect and George Street. Was there a traffic study done on those two locations to determine which one of these would be better off? I cannot believe that the Spring Street, Smith Street area is the best one traffic-wise. It's impossible. It's just not likely at all. So I don't want to get all disparaging here, but I will say that they can talk all they want about how they're trying to help the, lower income folks. They're just trying to make money, folks. And that's what's going on here. So as a concerned taxpayer and a resident of that street, happen to be right on the corner when all this travesty is going on, I am vehemently against this, and I can speak for everybody in the room. We're not happy about this, and we're going to just keep on fighting it until it goes down. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to make a few comments here. The first is any questions that I said, direct them to the chair. Secondly, we need to stay more focused on why we're here tonight. We're not here for any particular application. I know it's a slim distinction, but we need to keep the comments relevant to the application at hand. Also, I'm going to request that there not be any more clapping. If you wish to speak, come up and speak. I want the clapping to stop. All right. That being said, let's remember to keep things a little bit more relevant. I'd like to take the next person who'd like to come up and speak in opposition to the application. Come on up.
Cynthia Zukis, 270 Pearl Street, Seymour. My backyard abuts Spring Street, my driveway. Okay, this basically meeting tonight is on the site plan application and the zoning change. I'm upset at the fact that they're including 16 and 17 Smith Street. They're including it, trying to be part of the acreage there. First of all, 17 Smith Street is just something he put up this time. It used to belong to 16 Smith Street, which was a single-family stately home, which we had in-law apartments in it, which over the years, because families owned it, had their families living in there. 17 Smith Street is nothing but silt and sloping ledge that's already sloping into the brook, and it's silty, and it's not a buildable land at all. You're talking about 3 acres of land, at least an acre and a half to 2 acres that are not should be included into this acreage site plan at all, because there's no way you could build on it. There's no way they could even dig on it. In fact, one of the problems we had with the meetings, they never proposed how they would get trucks down there to put the drainage from the sewers, I mean not the sewers, but the drainage water into the brook, which is another topic, and then some wetlands. As far as between garden apartments and affordable apartments, they kept on stressing, every paragraph you heard was affordable, affordable, affordable. Not once did you mention the amount, what is affordable. Right now in Seymour, we have affordable apartments, Chamberlain Road, Walnut Street, Smith Street, Pond Street, Pearl Street. These are all multi-building apartment complexes. Garden City, North Street, which right now North Street, unfortunately, there's a lot of police activity constantly up there. You want affordable housing? Is that something? You have April Gardens up off of Skokerat. Also on Skokerat, at the lower part, you have 2 more other buildings. South Main Street, you have 3 apartment complexes down there. Off of Route 8, you have one that's an apartment complex. Balance Rock, which, yes, they are condos, but the majority of them, when the market went down, the landlords are now renting them out to affordable housing. Bungie Road, there's a couple of places that are multifamily, not so much apartment complex, but multiple family, like 4 and 5 unit apartment buildings. Also, like they say, with affordable building amounts, they're not saying exactly who can afford it. I remember reading in the Voices paper, the last meeting that you had, that they were saying like only 24 units would be affordable. The senior citizens themselves will not be able to afford these affordable housing. Who could afford affordable housing? What is the amount? Right now, my mortgage payment is going to be, which is 4 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, will never compare to what their affordable amounts are going to be. I want to know what they're going to charge. Like the nice engineer said he can never get. Yes, his generation, majority of them are because of high student loans. They're still staying with mom and dad because they can't pay off their student loans. There are apartments out there. A lot of times in Seymour, we have affordable housing where it's multi-families. Yes, that's the problem. That's what Seymour is about. Small-time multifamilies, not 3 stories, 4 stories high buildings. We brought up the fact that, yes, it would be good that you put buffers up. How can you put a buffer tree where the trees now, we can see the towers and the buildings up off Silver Mine Road, and there's buffers there, and we have, now that the tree leaves are going to come down, you're going to have those lights shining on Spring Street, which is okay. And they brought up the gun switch. I won't bring that up because that echoes will now stop. I mean, we could go on, but then again, like I said, this is just, I am very against the zone change. Any with new regulations is bad enough, because that land, I've been here my family's been in that neighborhood for over 100 years. My father was born in a house in 1916. So I know that land was always considered farmland. It was water land. And down the road, because everybody didn't realize of the zone change of multiple housing, you know, we always figure back then in the 1950s and 60s, when all of this in 1970s, multiple housing back then was 1 and 2 family houses. This is what the neighborhood wanted. This is what the neighborhood accepted. 3-story buildings with 90 families on a one-way street going up. You have, yes, 2 ways going one way, and then it cuts short right at Spring Street. He would have to take out majority of his land just for roadage, footage, to get buses in there. Where are the kids going to walk to the bus stop? The bus stop's at the bottom of the hill. There's no sidewalks. He didn't propose sidewalks to go down the bottom of the hill. He's not proposing anything. What the town? You have over 90 apartments, multifamily. You're talking 100, 150 kids. Seymour pays, estimate, $10,000 a year per student. Now we're bringing that up to over 100, 150 students. That's over close to $2 million a year that Seymour's going to have to come up just for the school system. Into Chatfield is the only one. So now we got to build another school. Yes, it's nice. Put multiple family, like 2-family homes. Be reasonable. It's a neighborhood. It's not downtown. It's not an industrial park. It's a small neighborhood with water problems galore, because now we're not even scheduled to have road repair on Spring Street or Smith Street. Where are they going to put, like, the sewers and the pipers? There's no drainage. This town's going to have to come up. Not the developer, not the lawyers aren't going to come up with the money to pay for the sewers, the drainage, the roads, the sidewalks, the police. I mean, I could go on, but that will be on another meeting that I will repeat myself again. I want to thank you all.
Thank you. All right, and again, I'd like to remind, the last thing I want to do is cut anybody short. I really don't want to do that. But every speaker who comes up, please try to focus a little bit more on the regulations that we heard about, the zone change that we heard about, comments that we heard from staff. Focus a little bit better. But having said that, let's have our next. Does anybody else wish to speak in opposition to this application?
This is a little off, but I'll make it real short.
Name, please.
Conrad Dom, 18 Spring Street.
I'm sorry, what was your last name?
Dom, D-A-H-M,
And your address?
18 Spring.
Thank you.
They said they did a traffic study. Well, what was the date of that traffic study? Because I lived there. I've been retired for 3 years. I've never seen it. Before our last meeting, a couple of years ago, they had put the lines down on the road. It was there 2 days before the meeting was supposed to go on. It was never completed. What was the date of that traffic study? Anyway, they put a new stop sign on Grand and Pearl about 2 months ago. They did one in front of Bob Koskalski's house on Pearl about 2 years ago. Why is that? That road hasn't changed. The Grand Street hasn't changed. All of a sudden, we got 2 stop signs. So anyway, I'll give you the.
All right, would anybody else like to speak in opposition to the application?
Hi, my name is Stephanie Ryer. I live at 67 Boxford Road. I have been a local wildlife rehabber for over 10 years now, and the only thing that I'm concerned about that I see here, and I want everybody's homes to be okay and stuff, but what about the wildlife? Everybody is really concerned about Triple E, and you're going to be taking out a lot of prime bat habitat, which we're about to find. So you're taking out a lot of woods. There's a lot of wetlands over there, and did we do any studies with the DEP to find out if there's any endangered species, any type of turtles or amphibians that need to be recognized? And there's also going to be a lot of migratory birds that go over that way, whether it be raptor, songbird, anything like that. And we already have a lot of issues now because of all the towers that are over there in the other industrial parks. So we've had issues with coyotes in Seymour,
Now that we outsource animal control, I get a lot of those calls, and it's on my personal line. So working full-time and trying to help out, I don't get paid for this, so I want to make sure that, hey, we're going to have 90 families there. What are the health concerns between EEE and the wildlife impact and them interacting with it? So those are my only concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak in opposition to the application?
Sorry about before. Rich Young, 272 Pearl Street. My garage is on Spring Street. We have one access to the sewer drain, which goes between my yard and my neighbor's yard. And they're going to build 90 units. So are we going to put another sewer drain to go into Pearl Street, or is it all going to come down to mine? Can that handle all that? That's all I got.
Christopher Calkins from 19 Spring Street. Just want to know, I know there have been multiple studies done on the things, but has anyone done a study on how the proposed change would affect the emergency services that we do get in Seymour? As you know, the EMS and the fire department are both volunteer organizations, and they're often taxed on a daily basis of calls. Such a large unit would no doubt tax that even more. I kind of know that lower income people tend to use the emergency services a little bit more than other people do. So it's just something to consider when looking at it, that police, fire, and EMS may be taxed by having more affordable housing in one located area. Just something to think about.
Thank you. Anybody else?
The hook and ladder that we have in Seymour. Rich Young, 272 Pearl. We know the hook and ladder can't go up one way. Got to come up to Smith Street by the Callahan house. Can't make that wide turn on Spring Street. That's another plan.
Those are very significant concerns, and when the site plan application comes in...
And the hook and ladder got stuck last year when they were throwing the popcorn balls out on Smith Street.
When the application of site plan comes up, that will definitely be something that we'll be looking at with fire marshal and other professionals. So it will be important. And that's one of the most important things.
Another thing is, Ansonia is killing us with restaurants and businesses. We have nothing in Seymour. Antique stores, can't park downtown because always will tow your car. We have nothing. Hot tamales and Wendy's. I don't know.
Would anybody else like to speak in opposition to the application?
My name is Helen Knapp, 13 Spring Street. That would be right where they would be coming down on the map. My house would be directly there if they choose to have it coming that way. Lights constantly. They're talking about 2 or 3 bedrooms. So we're not talking one car. There's going to be 2 or 3 cars in the family. And they mentioned something about only space for 1 in 75% of a car. Where are the other people who live in the house, and if they have visitors, where are they going to park? Spring Street is so tiny. In the winter, when they plow, you can't even go 1 car through. So I think all of you should consider maybe take a walk up where Spring Street, walk up where they're going to develop and see what it's like. That's all I have to say. I'm against it all.
Do you want to come up and identify yourself one more time, please?
Rich Young, 272 Pearl. There's a species of leopard frogs up in the back, up in the woods. They're on a dangerous species list on the state of Connecticut. We're going to relocate them.
Anybody else like to come up and speak in opposition to the application?
Christopher DeRosa, 158 Pearl Street. I live in between those 2 stop signs that the gentleman was talking about before, and it's like a raceway in there as it is now. It might as well be called 67A because there's so much traffic coming through here. You're looking at putting in 90 families in here, figure 2 cars. You're looking at almost 200 cars, extra cars going through here. It's already unsafe in the area as it is. This area can't hold another maybe 1,000 people coming into this area. It's going to be too overwhelming for the area. There's safety issues galore going down the road as it is. Not enough sidewalks, the bridge down there on North Street, all that whole area it's too tight. It's not going to work. And the same thing as with the emergency services, taxing them. You know, they run constantly throughout the night, throughout the days, going to all these places and going up in that tight area with those trucks. It's challenging. People are going to end up getting hurt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Craig Vincent, 17 Spring Street. Craig, C-R-A-I-G, Vincent. So just a couple of things I heard tonight, you know, from the developer. There seems to be other areas that might be better suited to build this thing. Anybody's ever been to the neighborhood of, like, where I live on Spring Street? It's a small, you know, quiet neighborhood. People walk their dogs. I see some of these people walk their dogs and their children there. And if you've been there, you just can't imagine that area is going to benefit from a 90-unit, you know, complex. There's the river right down the street, Bladen's Brook. It's a natural resource. I used to be quite the outdoorsman. Used to be an avid fisherman. So I'm wondering, were there any studies done as to how, well, you know, everything everybody said about the sewers, no sidewalks, it's all true. But my point is, to stay on point, if you have to change the zoning laws to put this, you know, to allow this, to consider it, if some of those other areas, the alternate areas are zoned, I think you guys said R18, why not, I mean, doesn't it make sense to take a place that was a factory to put this there, rather than dropping it in a beautiful, like, neighborhood where there's natural resources, where that area maybe is not quite ready to have that kind of dramatic change. And just to further highlight my point, I'm exactly the kind of person that would benefit from the type of housing you're going to put there. I'm approaching senior citizenship and I'm disabled, so I love low-income housing. I can't wait, but I don't see it in that neighborhood. And to have to change the existing zoning laws to do it seems like a bit of a stretch to me. When I drive around Seymour. I haven't been living in Seymour too long. My father lived here for, I don't know, 40 years. I've been in a few years, but I drive by and I see areas. I'm like, why don't they do something with this area? I see a factory. And I know you guys mentioned some of the other areas. Because anything you do is going to set a precedent. And there's so many areas for this neighborhood where if you set this precedent by changing the zoning, you know, I mean, down the road, somebody else is going to want to do something in this neighborhood. And we have the same issues. We have the topography where it flows down into the river. It's just, it has not been designed for the kind of traffic or even the pedestrian traffic. So to make a change, I think it's very important to consider we got to live with those changes down the road. That's all I'll say.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak in opposition?
John Lehman, 1 Spring Street. I live on the corner. I see a lot of traffic. It's very dangerous for the children, animals, dogs. Also, I'm afraid of the impact of this building on the values of the house. Again, there are a lot of other institution buildings there and down the street and in the area. This would just be adding another one. And I don't see it supporting. The street now has a bunch of potholes in it on Spring Street. If you drive down there, you'll see they're not being maintained now. So you add all these houses and cars, it's going to be worse. So if we can't maintain the street the way it is now, how are we going to do it then? That's just one of the many thoughts on having this new building.
Thank you.
Christina Kowalczyk, 260 Pearl Street.
260 Bill?
Pearl.
Oh, thank
So I'm at the intersection of Spring and Pearl Street, and I have 3 children. And already on Pearl Street is a big disaster with speeding. I mean, it's been an issue. We have an issue with the bus, where the bus is. It's not safe. And on Spring Street, it's a beautiful street. Like, it's a neighborhood where you can have your kids and feel safe. If we add this, we just add more traffic, and there's already so much traffic. The affordable housing, I understand. I mean, that's great, but we rent and we haven't left that place because of how well this neighborhood is. And just adding all those buildings are going to be, it's a disaster. So, and it won't be safe for the children. We already have a huge issue, as other people have mentioned with that. And the traffic, when I spoke with to see how many have passed through, was daily is 25,000 cars a day, which we're just going to increase it, which is going to be even more dangerous. And the speeds, you see them all the time, just people speeding. They don't care. We have people that go up on our curb and speed through. It's a disaster up there, so that's what I'm gonna say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Rich Young, 272 Pearl. My driveway's on Spring Street. Spring Street is about 1 inch to 2 inches higher than my driveway. The road needs to be graded down. I addressed that to Kurt a long time ago when I bought the house. And when it rains, it flows down and the flow's heavy. Sometimes I have to put sandbags out. The road needs to be graded down. Then there's a unit's going to go in. What are we going to do about sidewalks? Like I said, only one drain to go out to Pearl, and it's in the middle of my house. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Martina Perez. I live on 22 Spring Street. Martina Perez. Martina Perez. I'm a little short. Let's move it down a little bit. 22 Spring Street. I'll do my best with the baby in my arms. But so, as you know, I did write a letter down here to the town hall, and after hearing you say a few times to try to narrow it down more specifically to the planning and zoning, I'm not exactly sure I understand all of the linguistics of what Ms. Feinman was saying in terms of RFG lines and zones and whatever. But what I do know is that it sounded like in the lot next to my house, where they want to propose the fire access, they want, and correct me if I'm wrong because I don't understand a lot of it, it sounds like you want to set it back. Do you want to make it wider? Is that correct?
Well, actually,
Because you said that, sorry.
also keep in mind that this is not a site plan application.
So I don't understand it. I'm just more concerned about the access roads, the setbacks, how close it's going to be coming to my property line. I don't just have the back to worry about with my kids when they have the blasting going on, knocking down thousands of trees. I'm going to have the disruption in my house. No one else who's building this development is going to be living and breathing and walking through this process of making this development. You know, I have 2 of the grates that go down that side lot are sinking into the ground. If you go there, you can see it's completely eroded from the water because of the way the road curves down and then comes down from the side of the hill that comes down. So you're having water from all different areas that are running down, and it's eroding, it's sinking, it's not safe. I'm super concerned about the fact that Spring Street is not wide enough. It doesn't have the ability to have sidewalks for our kids. This neighborhood, this street is reviving. Families are moving onto the street. We have kids that run and ride and enjoy their neighborhood. And there's no sidewalks to provide the safety that these kids need. I can't tell you how much I often walk on these streets every single day and with my kids. And I can't tell you how many times I've almost been hit by a car. Off of 67, you put a stoplight for pedestrians to cross the street. People don't abide by these things. I've almost been hit several times where I have to walk across the street with a sign that says, "Let my family walk," because I don't feel safe. You add a development of this size with a traffic study that they did in 2015 that's trying to project something 10 years later, 2025, I think it said, or something. That's not, you're not living and breathing what they're trying to say is going to happen. You don't know the kinds of traffic that we get up and down that street on a daily basis and how dangerous it can be for kids. And bus stops. How are we going to accommodate all of these types of things into ensuring that the families who are there, the people that live there now and pay the taxes to this town, are going to be able to, reap the benefits of? I moved here because I wanted Seymour. It felt like a small town community, what I grew up in, what I was used to, hardworking people that earn their living. I just don't foresee something of this size being able to be built in such a small area with the streets that can't handle it. And I know this doesn't necessarily go into a planning and zoning issue, but, what am I supposed to tell my 4-year-old daughter when they're blasting 10 acres of trees behind my house? And she has to see something being ripped from the ground that she sees as life, beauty. How am I supposed to tell my child, "I'm sorry, honey, we just need to keep building," when you have black bears walking through town because they have nowhere to go? What are we doing, ripping more things out of the ground when we have pieces of property sitting vacant right across town with nothing on them? Why try to fit a circle into a square hole? I don't understand. You have to buy 4 pieces of property and try to make it fit into one thing. It doesn't seem to make sense. It shouldn't be this difficult. It should be able to flow. I mean, I wrote a lot of other concerns in this letter that I hope all of you read and take time to read. We are the people that live this life every day, not the developers. They don't have to sit in their backyard and see this. Am I going to have proof that my children are going to be safe playing in the backyard when this is going to be built, and how close it's going to be to my house, towering over my home? I guess I don't have anything else to say. It's all in the letter. Please read. Please read the letter. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other members of the public want to come up?
A little taller than her. Brett Daly, 260 Pearl Street. Just a few things I wanted to address. I know this is more so about turning multifamily into affordable housing zone. And one of the things I did here is that the multifamily goes from 75 feet of backyard, if I understand correctly, to 30 feet. And I believe a reduction like that decreases people's value in their own home, not from a financial standpoint, but how much they have pride in their own home, how much room they have for their children to play, for the people to spend time in their own properties. And I think that pushes more people out into the road, into the street, which can also lead to crime, overcrowding, as well as accidents. Another thing I wanted to just a safety standpoint, I know there was mentioned there's a hairpin turn on one side of Spring Street. The other side has approximately a 90-degree turn, a blind turn. And I know for a fact that there are 6 different children directly circling that turn itself. Their average age is about 6 years old. And I think the only reason an accident hasn't occurred on that blind 90-degree turn is because of the decreased amount of traffic on Spring Street. If we were to add, 200 cars going up and down every day, I'm afraid a tragedy would happen. Another thing is just, I believe with a change like that, you get a change in the tone of the neighborhood. As others have mentioned, you have affordable housing, it changes the kind of feeling people have for the neighborhood, the looks of it. It adds more just pavement rather than have woods, which has been proven to have a psychologically calming effect on people. Now you have just pavement and houses to look forward to. Another idea that, thing that I had noticed is water collection. A lot of people talk about drainage. I know there's a multifamily unit up behind Spring Street currently, and there are multiple what look like in-ground pools, which I can only assume are meant for water drainage and storage. And if, just small development like is there requires 3-4 large pool-sized holes in the ground, what's this going to require after a 90 person unit? And mosquitoes, we have this triple E, all these diseases. If you have all this extra water sitting around, the chance of someone getting sick is very high. That's all. Thank you.
My name is Michael Gerentano, 36 Smith Street. Currently on Smith Street, it's mostly a one-way street. Throughout the day, you will witness cars going up the wrong way, up the one-way street, or during rush hour traffic, people coming off 67, doing anywhere between 60 and 80 miles an hour down that street. Countless times I've almost been hit. I've seen the next door kids almost been hit. I've notified police about the issue. Nothing's been done since day one we moved into the house. We've been there for 2 years. The traffic problem you have with this is major. I don't see how you're going to put 200 plus more cars down Smith Street, which used to be a two-way street and was deemed not even feasible to be continued as a two-way street because of the affordable housing that was already added in there. So you're going to add more affordable housing already on a street that couldn't afford it to begin with and keep it a one-way street. It's not happening. The other problem you have is you're opening Pandora's box. As soon as you give someone the precedence to do something, the next person will say, well, you did it for them. Why not do it for me? And the next person is going to come down, well, you did that for them, so do this for me. So how many times are you going to keep saying, we're going to bend the rules, we're going to twist the rules, and let one person do something that the next person just did, and the following person from that? You got to draw a line and say, look, this is the way we set things. This is the way they are. They're going to stay this way because we are a small town, not a city. If you want to live in an affordable housing, guess what? That's why we have cities. It's the United States. If you can't afford it, you move to where you can afford it. I'm sorry, it's the way it is. I'm 29. I bought my own house. I'm sorry if you have loans. You can't afford what you have gotten yourself into. We've all made our life choices. It's not the people in the town's responsibility to cover your life choices. You make the bed, you lay in. I'll end it at that.
I wonder at this point if I could see by a show of hands how many people intend to speak. I just want to get an idea for scheduling the balance. We have just okay, come on up then. That's okay. Just identify yourself again.
Yes, Helen Knapp from 13 Spring Street. I just wanted to add also that Spring Street is so small. Most of the people that live on the street have to back out of their driveways because we have short driveways. And a few are elderly people and then others with children. And then when I had my sewers put in, they did the digging, and it's called Spring Street because there used to be artesian wells somewhere through there because I have the bottles that were dug up. So maybe that can go in to be checked out also, the wetland area. Thank you. That's it.
Hi, Jennifer Muller, 93 Walnut Street. I moved here 4 years ago. I chose Seymour because it is a small town. I moved from Ansonia, which is a larger city. When I moved here, I knew that my neighborhood was an older neighborhood with older homes and older people in it. I am obviously not one of those. However, I chose the neighborhood because it is quieter. My children are now teenagers. One of my issues with this property is first, they are not just trying to change the multifamily zoning, they are trying to take the R18 spot as well and change that. So it is not just changing, they ran these numbers, but they only compared to multifamily. That is not the only property there. Also, they are considering 17 Smith Street, which I think is completely inappropriate. If I wanted to add an addition to my house, you'd ask me how much land I had and compare that. If I bought the property across the street from me, you would not allow me to use that as part of my land if I wanted to add an addition to my home. I do not think it should be considered on their property as well. And my other issue is the 1.75 spaces. They're talking about 2 and 3 bedroom homes. I can tell you right now that I have 2 teenagers. I will have 4 cars in my home when my children turn 16. So although I'm not saying every family is going to have 4 cars, there are going to be some that have 4, or maybe even 5 if they have children that share bedrooms. There may be some that have 1 or 2. I don't think the average will be 1.75, however. So you are adding a lot of traffic, that parking traffic, onto Smith and Spring Street. And if you have driven down that street, you know that it is not capable of handling off-street parking. Not safely, not for people to get out of their cars when a car is coming by or anything of that sort. So I know that there's a lot of issues concerning the site. That's not what we're talking about today, but those are the zoning issues I'd like you to consider. Thank you.
Hi, Sarah Castro, 10 Spring Street. Again, I get a little bit lost between some of the lingo that gets tossed around here, so my apologies. But I do think it's important that I get up here and say what I need to say. I have a concern about the increased traffic, just as everybody has said. I have a 3-year-old child, and he plays with the neighborhood children as well. I am concerned about the water. I moved into our house in 2015, and the first 2 years that I lived there, my husband and I had no water issues in our basement or in our backyard. And over the course of the last 2 years, I'd say between 2017 and 2019, I've had multiple issues with water in my basement, resulting in inches of water down there. As well as every time it rains and when we have heavy snow and it melts, I have pooling of water that covers my entire back patio and will feed into the basement. The front yard of my house on the one side, because of the runoff that comes down from that the wetlands, it's boggy and sinking. It changes every year. So I am concerned about the drainage system that's under Spring Street. I'm concerned about the narrow and deteriorating roads. My son also goes to the preschool at the end of Smith Street, Cocapelli Discovery Center. They have 3 and 4-year-olds there. I'm not sure what their total capacity is, but I know that there's 10 students in the 3-year-old class right now, and there has to be at least 10 in the 4-year-old, so that's 20 children who are going to, there's traffic going in and out of that location as well, and as everybody has said, that the street is one way. And I'm concerned about the environmental changes. Again, I moved to Seymour because it's small and it's tight-knit, and I've had the opportunity to meet all of the majority of the people that live in the vicinity that I do, and I want my child to grow up in the neighborhood of children where I'm not afraid to send them down the road to knock on the neighbor's door. But when you increase the traffic flow and there's multiple safety issues at this point. I like the natural privacy and the natural beauty that is behind my home, and that's going to be completely changed, and it's totally going to displace the wildlife that's back there. I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Lehman, 1 Spring Street. I just want to say that at the end of the street, right now, the way it's situated, where there's a turn when you go into the street, it's so sharp, I don't think you can make it without going on the wrong side of the road. So, I mean, with that situation, and you add 90 more cars, plus they have more than one car sometimes, that's going to be a traffic problem right there. I don't think you could take a right-hand turn onto Spring without going outside your lane. In other words, going into oncoming traffic lane. Physically, you cannot turn. So I think that a traffic study needs to be looked into about that with adding all these people. It's kind of one way over there, you know. So just want to make you aware of that.
All right, go ahead.
Tom, 15 Spring Street. To the gentleman's point over here, I did write an email to Aquarian Water and asked them about the limit on the usage of the Seymour Reservoir. And what they told me was they're sending it to the drought team, and that was all I got from them. So, at that point. In between my house and the Perez family's house is 20 Spring Street. I've been mowing that for 34 years. That's why it looks like a lawn. To Helen's point, she was saying about the water coming down. Right now it's just dirt. The water comes down there and it just flows like crazy into her driveway. When that's paved, there's going to be thousands and thousands of gallons coming down. I don't care what kind of sewer you put in there. It's going to be paved. It's going to be straight flow right into her yard. So, thank you very much.
All right, does anybody else wish to speak? All right, seeing that, would the developer like to make any comments about anything that they've heard?
There we go. Heard a lot of interesting feedback, much of which relates to the ultimate site plan. So a lot of my comments are going to be based on the impact to the regulation, and we can reserve comments on the site plan later. A lot of folks are concerned about traffic and drainage and sewers and safety and impact on municipal resources, impact on schools, those sorts of things. And it's interesting to me because this property, as I mentioned, is almost entirely zoned multifamily. We are not talking about a piece of property in a single family zone that we are plopping multifamily on. This is multifamily zone property. It's also property that was subject to a very recent text change by this commission that increased the available density on the site, that removed requirements for municipal sewer and municipal water. You no longer have to have that for garden apartments in the MF zone. You do in the AHZ zone, but you don't in the MF zone. These are very, very recent changes. I believe you adopted them in August. One has to assume that when you all deemed it important to make those changes, you considered the impacts on your municipal resources. You considered the traffic impacts. You considered the sewers. You considered the drainage. You considered the impact on your schools. There are only a handful of vacant MF sites. So when you made those adjustments to your MF zone, I assume that you also considered my client's property as a possible development site, because that's what it is. It's not parkland. As much as people have enjoyed the trees and the wildlife and the frogs and the other, animals that we heard about, they all sound lovely, but this is not a park and it's not a wildlife preserve. It's a development parcel that my client bought in 2015 and has been trying to redevelop since that time. He owns it. They own it. Something is going to go there. Under your current regulations, the only thing that can go there as of right, I believe you can max out at 4 units on 10 plus acres as of right. Everything else requires a special permit. 4 units. That doesn't seem reasonable to me. We heard a lot about maintenance needs in the community, in the neighborhood. Maintenance requires money. Property taxes on this site, in total, all 3 of them, just over $8,000. If we redevelop the site, I have to imagine that that's going to go up exponentially. I can tell you, I took a look just randomly at a multifamily site down on South Main Street. It's 25 units from 1974, just over an acre and a half. The town collects over $27,000 a year for that. Those property taxes are going to be meaningful. One of the women that came to the microphone noted 17 Smith Street, that it's not a development parcel. We agree. We're not trying to develop it. We are using it for purposes of drainage at this point. This is a site plan related issue, but I feel the need to address it. It also is not included in our development rights. So for purposes of calculating our density, we did not use it. We only used 20 Spring Street and 16 Smith Street. Someone mentioned that utilizing R18 property is inappropriate, that it should all be MF, that we shouldn't be changing the zoning. We can't do that. This property, the only access to it, right here, it's zoned R18. So otherwise, there's no access.
Oh, whoa.
That's a problem. You can't say that something is a development parcel that can't be developed. You can't call something multifamily and say things like garden apartments can go there when they really can't. That's not appropriate. This parcel was purchased in order to ensure safe access so that we could have 2 access points. I'm sure that Ms. Perez would not be happy if this was the only source of access to the property. Instead, we have this, and we're able, if you all deem it appropriate, to use that for emergency purposes only. In terms of the increase in density, we're talking about 3 additional units per acre, comparing the MF zone to the AHC zone. 3 units an acre. In terms of parking, we're talking about a difference of 2 spaces per unit versus 1.75. These are not significant changes. In terms of schools, your POCD explicitly states that the number of school-age children is decreasing. In fact, it goes as far as to say that the school facilities that exist today may need to be repurposed for the growing senior population. So I believe it's a bit disingenuous to suggest that we're going to have a school problem.
If I could just interrupt for a moment. I don't disagree with anything you said. My thought was it would make sense for you to address the issues that were brought up, not because they're technically correct or technically accurate, but because they mean a lot to the people sitting here. So perhaps a more personal approach to some of the more personal objections would be appropriate.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was addressing each of those, but I'll try to go by name as best as I can from my notes.
But rather than tell us what's in our plan development, tell us what we should have done or could have done back when we did other zone changes, is not why, that may not be as important as addressing specific things that these people, as relevant or irrelevant as they may be, the ultimate decision of the board. You know that better than all of us. I still think it's a wise thing to do.
I'm happy to address everyone's comments to the best of my ability. I was just trying to create a record. Spoke about the wildlife. We are going to be studying the wildlife with Ms. Ryer. I'm sorry if I mispronounced anyone's name. I believe that you spoke about the bat habitat and other wildlife on the property. We will be studying that with DEP. We heard the safety concerns related to fire truck access. We certainly will be working with the fire marshal on those issues in connection with the site plan application. Heard about traffic, obviously, and once I step aside, I would love to have my traffic engineer address any concerns in terms of the text. So I would suggest, concerns related to the difference in density between what is zoned today versus what we're proposing, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman.
Actually, if I could just interject right there, I think that might be more appropriate to do next week.
Okay.
Only because we have some other agenda items to get through, and it's very important, and I would hope people will come back. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine with me. Heard a lot about the sidewalks. Unfortunately, I also understand that Spring Street is relatively narrow, so I have to imagine that may be one reason that the town has not put sidewalks there to date. I don't know whether or not that came up in connection with the other larger developments on either side of the property, but I certainly understand the concern with safety. Heard a lot about it setting a precedent, it not being the right location. I think we've talked about that. I would suggest it is the right location. It's a multifamily zone piece of property. Heard about Seymour not having a lot of options, I guess, for entertainment. Hopefully, when you increase the population, especially with younger folks, that would change. That would be the goal. Some folks spoke about the affordability aspect, that if you are unable to afford the rents in Seymour, then perhaps you should live in a different location. I guess my only response to that is that just is not the state's policy. The state has created a strong public policy goal encouraging affordable housing in every municipality, not just our large cities. Sorry, my notes are a little... a gentleman spoke about the rear yard change, and I would like to... The regulation does propose a reduction in the rear yard from 75 feet to 35 feet. And I will confess that the primary reason that we did that is that we were unsure of where the rear yard ended on our property. So it's hard to see from here, but this dashed line is the actual building setback, and it's 75 feet. But when you come to around the corner here, it gets tighter, closer to 35 feet. And that was the reason that we had to modify the regulations. So in fact, the majority of, or perhaps the entirety of our rear yard is 75 feet. But I didn't want to be in a position of not conforming to the regulation that we were proposing. I also want to point out that is only the rear yard that we were reducing. We weren't reducing the front yards or the side yards. So any concern about it coming closer to the street, it's not that. It's the rear yard. A few folks were, I think, that live in the homes along Spring Street were concerned about the proximity of the buildings to their homes. That setback has been maintained. So that's the same setback as exists under the MF zone. I appreciated your comments from your staff, and we certainly would welcome the opportunity to work with you all on any, some modifications that are appropriate, and hopefully we'll be able to do that between now and the next hearing. Someone spoke about the urgency, why this needs to happen now, working towards a moratorium, doing it the right way. I guess I would suggest that this hasn't been urgent My client's on the property since 2015 and has been trying to redevelop it. And we're hopeful that the commission will see fit to approve this application. He's been waiting a long time, pays taxes, assumes it's a developable lot. That has always been the assumption. In order to get a moratorium, you have to build the housing. So if there's a more appropriate place than your multifamily zones, then that's obviously within your purview to decide. But we certainly believe that the multifamily zones seem like the appropriate place. I hope that I touched on the concerns I heard. I know there are site plan related issues related to drainage and sewers and things along those lines, which certainly will, I'm sure, get into in connection with the site plan application.
Mr. Cohen did have a good question.
Sure.
Yes, with the amount of people that brought it up, I feel an obligation, and Mr. Chairman, please stop me if you feel this is more appropriate for the site plan discussion, but it doesn't seem applicable to the site plan. The parking study that was done looked at 2015 traffic and compared it to a projection of 2021. And the conclusion of the study, based on the findings of this report and professional opinion, that the construction of the proposed apartment complex will not impede or adversely affect traffic operations on the adjacent roadway network. You looked at 4 intersections at Spring, Smith, and North Street. But is there a possibility that some additional work could be done to look at the impact on Route 67, Main Street, and the main roads that are very close to Spring and Smith?
It's certainly something that I'm happy to speak to my client about.
Okay, because these intersections here look very close to 67, and living off of Skokerat, I can tell you it's a parking lot at rush hour.
Understood.
Anything further?
Unless you think that there's something based on your notes that I failed to address.
I think it's fine. I think what I would like to have happen, obviously staff will be talking to staff about various things. I would like to also reconcile the difference in opinion with respect to the burden shift.
Oh, absolutely. I will work with Attorney Sullivan on that. I do have case law.
How that pans out. But at this point, what I'd like to do is continue, unless staff has any other comments I'd like to make, I'd like to continue the meeting to our next meeting in November. Pardon me? And in the interim, staff and get a better understanding of all of that.
What's the date and time of that? I'm sorry.
About to solicit a motion for that. What's our exact? Well, we'll be continuing with them for the regular. Well, all we're trying to do here is continue.
I believe we have to continue to a date certain
14.
at 6:30 in this room.
Simply going without a motion, then we're simply going. So we will continue with them November 14, same time, same place. 6:30.
You don't need to republish as long as it's continued on the record.
So
Unless-
same time, same place, November 14th. We'll continue to that date. And obviously, the public is welcome to come back at that time. Probably. All right, with that,
Thank you all for your time.
we are continued, and we're going to go now into our regular certificate. Yeah, we'll wait till the regular meeting. We'll take 5 before we get to the regular part of the meeting.
Oh, boy. I would never buy a piece of property unless I had access to it, you know? You buy a piece of property, you know access.
That's it.
You're
You're
stupid.
landlocked, you're landlocked.
Then you gotta.
Then you gotta buy the properties in front of it.
That's quite all right.
I believe. Yes. Yes. And yes. Hey, good to see you. Yes. I think right before they had moved, they saw their car at your house a few times, and then they connected the dots. Yes. Every time I drive by there, I'm like, is there a box sticker? I always love to see if there's a box sticker. Oh yeah, if I do, I have to send it. Thank you. Oh yeah, almost.